sphere by Europe and the European Commission in the last 6 or 4 years, or even more if you consider the data protection law. And recently, mainly after Donald Trump's announcement of his new policy for the digital realm and for fostering investments on mainly on AI, there has been questioning about the initiatives in Brazil for regulating digital service, competition in digital markets, and also AI. In the beginning of this month, we have organized also a seminar in Brasilia, just to discuss what does that means. What does that mean for the Brazilian initiatives of regulation of competition law and in digital markets? Now we have the opportunity to discuss what are the implications for the regulation of AI. Actually, I have already defended that we cannot just imitate or copy what is being done in Europe or the US policy. Actually, we have to find our way. And to find our way, it's very interesting to see the foreign experience. But to see, that means to study it, to understand what is happening, and not going on with superficial news. For instance, that it's true that Europe is questioning whether the regulation in the last 6 or 4 years of the digital realm was excessive in the sense that it may hinder the development of technology in Europe. That's true. But that doesn't mean that Europe or the European Commission is revoking all regulation. Yeah, it means that that new regulation is being discussed much more carefully, and also that the present regulation is under discussion on interpretation, on how is the better way to apply it, and also to demystify some beliefs about regulation, particularly about AI. I was discussing with Georg Borges that not only in Europe, but also in Brazil, the regulation, there was a lot of propaganda and marketing about the regulation by politicians saying that the AI regulation is intended to save humanity from the threats by AI. But actually, that's not really true. Actually, the legal framework is intended, first of all, to bring legal certainty to some fields where the technology brings doubts on interpretation or its implementation, even by certification problems. And so there are virtues of having rules about technology to bring legal certainty. There are risks that excessive regulation may hinder economic and the development the technology. So we have to learn from these experiences instead of just hearing something and then with an impulse go through another completely different reaction. We have to learn from the self-evaluation that Europeans are doing about their last year efforts on the regulation of digital technology. We have also to pay attention in a geopolitical scenario, what's happening with China, what's happening with US, to find our best way to regulate, since we have indeed a problem with legal certainty, because our judicial system is not effectively prepared to handle all challenges that technology brings. So how to bring legal certainty and also to how to foster. This is something that we need, investments and development in the digital realm, because regulation is serves. It's not only about prohibitions. It's also about incentives and fostering investments and opportunities for development. So with this in mind, we've brought here today Costanza Maesa from the University of Siena. Actually, we brought a few colleagues in this international seminar who have cooperations with our university and particularly with Lawgorithm. So Costanza Maesa is visiting the University of São Paulo for 2 years with a scholarship from the European Commission, the Marie Curie scholarship, to make here her postdoc program. And she's particularly interested in investigation in a project called Echo AI. What are the some possible frameworks for the regulation of the impacts of AI on environment? So the first part of our meeting, we are going to discuss with Costanza, what does it mean, green AI? What are the initiatives already present in the regulation, the European regulation of sustainability, and also on AI, because there are mentions in the AI Act about it. And to bring the Brazilian perspective, Professor Ana Nusdeu, our colleague here, and she is a scholar specialized in environmental law, will give us an idea of what is the landscape, how is the cooperation between, or how Brazil is involved in the international landscape of sustainability. And then we move to the discussion of the European regulation on AI with two main aspects. First, the regulation of governance of AI in organizations, that means the AI Act, and particularly Tarik is going to bring what are the main challenges in the implementation of the AI Act by European organizations, because this is the one of the arguments. The AI Act is so bureaucratic that is bringing lots of difficulties for implementation. So let us understand what are these difficulties, what are the challenges, what is the state of the art, because the Europeans made this first movement of trying to bring a robust regulation of governments of AI systems in organizations. And then Georg Borges from the University of Saarland, who also cooperates with us, first with a project in the DFG together with CAPS on the certification of AI as a means for the regulation of AI. So we have this project together that we are going to start developing from May on. And also Tarik is cooperating with the University of São Paulo in a program of double degrees with the University of Lyon, where he is a professor. So let us start then with the subject matter of green AI, and then we move to AI governance and responsibility. So please, Costanza, it's really a pleasure to have you here. Unfortunately, Costanza was not able to join us here, but she could make it online. But she's already in São Paulo.
Yeah. So thank you very much. Thank you very much to Professor Giuliano Maragnao for giving me the opportunity to be here. As he said, I'm here for 2 years because I had the chance to have my project being founded by the EU, and the project is about yes, an ecological AI. So the final objective of the project is to draft a legal framework on an ecological AI. So to rewrite the EU AI Act in an ecological way. Because as I will say today, in my opinion, the AI Act now is not adequate to guarantee the sustainability of AI systems. So I just started the project because it started in mid-November, and then I had to move and come here. And so I've just started to think about it. So I have more questions than answers, but I will pose all the questions, and maybe you have some answer also that could help me to go through the research. So what do we mean with green AI? This is a term which has been coined recently. And one of the problems that I raise in my research is that it mostly relates to energy efficiency, which is really important. And as we will see also in Brazil, that's a big issue. But for the reason I'm going to explain, is not the only problem for the environment and also for the fundamental rights of the people living in close to data centers. For example, now we are going to see why, and to other infrastructure which are needed for AI to train and so to work properly. So there is a double phase of green AI, and so and of the relationship between AI and sustainability, because and they have been called AI for sustainability or sustainability of AI. What does it mean? AI for sustainability refers to all the uses of AI to promote sustainable solutions. So, for example, there are different uses of AI to tackle climate change. For example, AI can help to improve the monitoring of and to monitor the environmental impacts and trends, to strengthen predictive capabilities, and to, for example, also in the building sector or in the agricultural sector, to optimize energy consumption. So there are some uses of AI to help improving climate change. And these uses have been studied more, and there is a lot of literature on it and studies about it, and they are already used, some of them. But there are only few authors now, more and more, but not a lot, who are studying the effects on the environment of AI systems. So that is what's called sustainability of AI. So it's a way to calculate the environmental footprint generated by AI models. And an important aspect which we have to consider to talk about sustainability of AI is that AI system needs also infrastructure to function properly. So here there is also a reconsideration of territory and of the materiality of the internet and AI system, because that is more a philosophical aspect, but I think it's important because in the last years we only considered AI and the internet as merely virtual, and it was called we thought that all the operations were carried out in the cyberspace, what is called cyberspace. Also in many international treaties we talk about cyberspace, and we don't consider also the materiality, and so also the territorial space and the real space that is needed now we are considering AI, but in general for the internet to work. Because, for example, to work, they need underwater space where cables pass, or air space where data from satellites and antennas are transmitted. And then there are the territories where raw material are extracted or where electronic waste is deposited. And there are the territories where data centers are located. And in data centers is where all the AI system, there are all the hardware and software where AI systems are trained. So that's an important issue, and there are now some authors who are discussing this, and they talk also about data colonialism and green extractivism, because now colonialism has a different shape, and also green extractivism means that the extraction of these raw materials, even if it is for green purposes, can in reality have a double phase and create problems for the environment and the rights of people living there. So which are the most important negative effects of the use of AI for the environment? One of the most problematic one is water consumption, because AI infrastructure, and in particular data center, need a huge amount of water to work, because water is used to cool data centers, and the water that is used cannot even easily reused, because chemicals are added to water so that the water can make all the hardware work properly. And so if water is released in the soil, then it pollutes it and cannot be reused. There are studies and reports about the consumption of water. And for example, data centers owned by Google consumed 25 billion liters of water and approximately 20 million liters of water to cool servers in 2022. And they use mostly potable water, because so there are not microorganisms and bacteria that can damage all the hardware and the computer there. And this amount of water will increase also in the next years. There are some esteem and about it, and it will increase a lot. Another problem is that these data centers are sometimes located even in places, for example, in the Atacama Desert in Chile, where there is a dry weather, so there is not a lot of water, and it is not so cold. So we need even more water to cool all these computers in the data center. Another problem is energy consumption, because data centers consume a huge amount also of energy, of electricity, which correspond approximately to the 2% of the total electricity used globally. And also there are some esteem and some calculation about how much energy is used. And some studies calculated that renewable energy sources will not even be able to meet the energy demand of data center, even if they are there, because it's really huge and it's going to increase in the next year. And again, the greater negative damages will be in non-EU countries, mostly in South America. That's also why I'm here, because they are building and they want to build this data center here because of the proximity with the US. And so for the data we are using in Europe, we are destroying the environment, and we are violating the rights of population living here and in other third countries. Another problem is connected to the extraction of raw materials. Again, because they need lithium, for example, and copper, indium, aluminium, palladium, cobalt, and rare earths. And all these materials are extracted again in third, often not so economically powerful countries. And all these materials are needed for rechargeable batteries that we need to operate wireless electronic objects that are needed for intelligent and so smart technologies such as AI. The problem is that, again, to extract these materials, we need a large amount of water, and we need also a lot of energy, and these materials are toxic if released in the environment and in the soil. So there is the problem of pollution and also of serious disease for the population living close to these mining spots. And there are data which are really important about it. So that's the problem also for renewable energies, because we need some of these materials also for solar panels, for example, or other renewable energy. So that's another problem that we are discussing at BU level, because we can't create damages for the environment even using these new technologies. So we have to take into account this as well while drafting the legislation. And then another problem is the distancing of e-waste, because again, e-waste that can be toxic because it contains substances really hazardous to health, such as mercury, and they are non-biodegradable. And they can accumulate in soil, air, or water, or also in other living organisms. They are usually abandoned or burned in third countries, and they're not really properly collected and recycled. For example, in the EU, that says that is one of the countries where the major part of e-waste is recycled. In reality, only the 20% of e-waste is recycled, while it's not documented what is the fate of the remaining 80%. So that's another problem. So as we saw, all the consequences and the negative effects usually are externalized in third countries and of the population living there. So then the question I asked myself was, is the EU legal framework on green AI effective to cope with these issues and to deal with these issues? And so there is a legislation on it. So also on the externalization cost, environmental cost that is externalized and that derive from AI systems. And the answer at the moment is no, because I considered some pieces of legislation, in particular the AI Act, and then also some other acts that have been adopted to implement the European Green Deal. Then now the situation, maybe it can be worsened again, also because now the European Commission and the European Parliament, now at the European level, there is not anymore this focus on environmental issues as it was before with the new Commission, so it could be even worse. We were discussing with some other scholars, and we are following also as Professor before said, with Trump also in Europe, we are following how is the situation because it can be worsened. But before, they said that it was a really innovative piece of legislation, that it can be imitated abroad, and so that it can be an example for other countries. But in reality, I found that, for example, in the AI Act, that is not an issue which has been considered, for example. There are some references to sustainability that now I'm going to list, but to me they are not enough. So in the AI Act, for example, in Article 40, it is stated that the Commission shall ask European standardization organization to issue standardization request, and in this request they also have to report and document the performance of AI system, and among the condition that they have to consider, there is also the consumption of energy and the consumption of other resources during its life cycle. And so then I will say, because to me that's not enough. Then is in the Act there is written that, because in the, maybe we are going to discuss it later, but then there are many differences in the AI Act, no? And they are based on different level of risk. So we talk about general purpose AI models or high risk AI systems. So for high risk AI system, they should report direct or indirect damage to the environment and consider it a serious incident, while for general purpose AI models, they just have to document the known or estimated energy consumption of the model. And the last mention is a mention to create codes of conduct to foster the voluntary application of some or all of the mandatory requirements applicable to high-risk AI system. So why to me that's not enough? Because in the AI Act, in conclusion, there is only focus on standardization requests rather than mandatory requirements. There are no mandatory requirements, and there are no coercive mechanisms to enforce it. Then the attention is placed only on energy consumption and on other essential aspects, as for example the excessive water consumption, or the extraction of raw material, or the recycling of electronic waste. So only energy consumption is taken into consideration, but only in this way. And then as regard codes of conduct, they are only on a voluntary basis. So again, there are no compulsory obligation, and there is not a coercive mechanism. So in the absence of legal obligation and an effective control system, I think that AI providers and deployers will not be incentivized to prioritize environmental concerns over short-term profits. So that's not really encouraging. Then I examine briefly, then I have to do it better during all the projects. So in these 2 years, some of the acts adopted to implement the Green Deal, but so for example, the regulation on the shipment of waste and the regulation on critical raw materials, and the regulation on corporate sustainability due diligence, because they are also relevant in this case. Now I don't have time because it's already late, but even in these cases, there was no adequate solution to solve these issues for different reasons, and then maybe in the debate we can go deep into it if you want, and if we have time. And what I wanted to say, because I think it's important, is that considering that the legal framework is not enough, I tried to look at the fundamental rights, so to see whether we can use fundamental rights to protect the rights that are violated outside the EU territory, beyond the EU territory. So the fundamental rights violated of the population living close to the data center and to the mining spots and to where e-waste are abandoned is the right to health, because as I said, there are also toxic materials. The right to access to water, because there are some population who could not drink anymore clean water because of data center, and the right to to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. So even in this case, while from an international perspective, for these two rights, so the right to access to water and the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment have been protected and have been recognized in international treaties, and the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment now has been recognized also by the European Court of Human Rights. And there is also a recommendation to add the protocol on the right to a safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, so that there is not only the jurisprudence of the court, but is also legal rights. Again, in the European Charter of Fundamental Rights.
Costanza, maybe it's interesting to hear a little bit Ana nos deu precisely upon this international scenario and how these treaties are applied here in Brazil. We are a bit ahead of time. Could wrap it up.
Yeah. So that's why. I think these are the main principles violated. Then, so I examined the extraterritorial application of the EU Charter, and I found that it can be applied extraterritorially for some reason, and then I can explain if you want. And so, concluding, either we amend the legislation that there is, and we can propose some solution, or the Court of Justice interpret it in a way that is more ecological, or we can take advantage of the territorial application of the Charter and give protection to the rights violated to the population and the environment outside the EU territory. But at the moment, there is nothing of this has been done, and so these are possible solutions that we have to study and to see whether they are feasible. I can't hear.
Thank you, Costanza. I believe that we will have a lot to discuss, particularly this year and the following years, regarding the project I'm now exploring with Georg, because exactly we're exploring the potentials of private and voluntary certification as a means to regulate AI. And this applies also, of course, to green AI. Actually, the Brazilian draft, it began quite similar to the EU AI Act, but it changed a lot during legislative debate. And there is a chapter only about certification and another about sustainability that connects to certification, bringing incentives for a certification program on environmental responsibility for AI. So there will be a lot of room for discussions. And I'm also inviting Ana to join us in this discussion. I'm sure she could. She'll be able to bring a lot of enlightenment for us. So I'll give the floor to Ana nos deu. Thank you very much, Costanza.
Thank you.
I don't know. Maybe you have to leave, but then later you come, right?
Yeah. At 10 I have to leave. Yeah, and later I'll be here again at 10:30.
Okay, perfect.
So thank you, Juliano, for the invitation. It's great meeting Costanza and also George and Tarik, and to meet Tarik again. And thanks for the audience. And I was saying at the beginning, before we started, that I am a kind of analogical person, which has a little bit of fear and resistance about the artificial intelligence. But as an environmental law professor, of course, this is a frontier field, a new field that I need to be acquainted and to discuss. And I'm glad I'm here. I learned a lot listening Costanza, and I'm sure you have a lot to talk about during your stay here. So basically, my contribution is to present today is to present a basic framework of the Brazilian environmental law, including some international obligations deriving from the treaties Brazil has ratified. And more importantly, there are constitutional rules on environmental law as well. And so this is the framework in which artificial intelligence, environmental impacts are to be evaluated and possibly restricted in Brazil. So basically, Costanza have already done the job to discuss the environmental impacts of artificial intelligence. So I think I can just skip and talk more briefly about this problem. And then I will then address the international treaties, basically the climate change regime, which discusses quite a bit of the energy and emissions, carbon emission problems that will probably be increased within by artificial intelligence activities. And finally, how some instruments and rules of the constitutional may apply. So concerning the AI impacts, I will skip this first item in order that we can save some time for discussion after our presentations. And as Costanza mentioned, there is this ambivalent character because there's a lot of hope concerning artificial intelligence possibilities of contributing to more control and monitoring and fiscalization, especially when we think about the environmental problems of
Seeing your slide. Are we seeing the slides? Yeah. Okay. But the Teams. It's not in the Teams. Yeah. It's not. It's only the first. Yes, only the first slide, right? Yeah.
That happens sometimes. So yeah.
Maybe if instead of sharing the presentation with this team, you just share the PowerPoint.
Simplesmente, o Meet é dos melhores para passar, não sei por que é.
Apresenta o PowerPoint mesmo, sem a moda apresentação. Assim.
Mas vamos colocar na tela cheia, então.
Isso. Você só revisa aqui, ó. Reviso aqui e já dá para enxergar muito bem.
Isso. Ah, boa. Tá. Como está a plateia? Como tá? Now it works? Great. So that's because AI has this potential of monitoring, and considering that in Brazil, the deforestation is our main problem, and so that could be an interesting way. We have already advanced a lot in radars, but another generation, technology generation. So perhaps this AI may improve this monitoring in real time and with details that would allow more enforcement of environmental laws and regulations. But then, considering all these impacts Costanza just mentioned, and I would perhaps I would highlight the energy consumption and the production of waste and water consumption. So considering these impacts, my question is, which is the legal framework of environmental protection in Brazil? So that's what I will explain now. And finally discuss how these impacts of artificial intelligence will be possibly addressed in according to Brazilian legislation. So let's begin with the climate change regime. So basically, I'm not sure whether you are acquainted, but the climate change is a significant environmental problem, a global environmental problem nowadays, that which answers in the international community, in the international law, is based basically in two important treaties. The first one is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which designed an international regime according to which countries need to achieve more ambitious aims and targets regarding the combat, the control of climate change, which means the reduction of emissions and adaptation to the climate change that's already happening. And there is another important treaty, that's the Kyoto Protocol, that I will not mention today. And then finally, the Paris Agreement, that addresses more precisely this system of achieving targets and proposing and achieving emission reduction targets. So basically, the Paris Agreement determines the obligation to the submission of a nationally determined contribution, which means a national target for emission reductions. And Brazilian second NDC proposes the reduction between 59% and 65% of its emission compared to 2005 levels by 2035. So that's the emission reduction targets of Brazil. It's okay. It's not very ambitious, but it's not. It requires some efforts, and in most of countries, especially the developed countries, emission reductions targets requires a significant change in the energy sources, because most of industrial countries has their energy sources based on fossil energy. But in Brazil and Brazilian, especially the official discourse, likes to underline that Brazil has a very clean energy source, which is more or less clean, but let's say that it has a significant percentage of renewables, which accounts according to last records of 2024, Brazil reached the percentage of 49.1% of renewables, and which is basically what is explained by the strong basis of hydropower in our energy matrix, and the last decade's increase in solar and wind sources, plus biofuels, where Brazil is very strong as well. But in parallel, we had in recent decades also an increase of the thermoelectric energy. That's because the hydropower tends to reduce its force as a result of the water scarcity and the drier climate that results from climate change. So the risk here, if we consider that artificial intelligence is a new activity that requires a large amount of energy, according to what Costanza confirmed, and so we would have a risk of increasing the use of thermoelectric energy. Maybe data centers could produce its own energy from solar and wind, but they would be kind of competing with these clean sources of energy. And so that could be a problem. That could be a problem for the accomplishment of the Brazilian targets regarding the climate regime. And then, if we look at the Brazilian Constitution, basically we have, and that I can establish a point of contact with Costanza's discussion about the possibilities of using human rights as a basis to control some effects, some impacts of artificial intelligence. Brazilian Constitution recognizes a right to an ecologically based environment. The environmental protection is also a principle of the economic order. That's a provision that's often claimed as in its significance of demanding and requiring the sustainability of our economic development process. And so that's an interesting provision as well. And also the environmental impact assessment as an important environmental instrument is expressly referred in the Constitution, and that's important because from time to time, states law, which means law at the level of the states in Brazil, try to change legislation to lessen licensing requirements for some activities. And when this legislation tends to decrease the scope of the environmental impact assessments, they are considered unconstitutional. So that's a good that's a good and I would say effective rule of the Constitution. But what is interesting is that this recognition of the right to an ecologically balanced environment has triggered the doctrinal development of the non-regression principle, according to which legislation could not reduce the protection to environmental rights. And so, of course, this principle tends to have a rhetorical effect that's strong, but in practice, there has been a case where there was the legislation, a new legislation, in fact, reduced the protection of forests, and this principle this principle was not rejected, but it didn't led the Supreme Court to consider that this new law was unconstitutional. So it's not a principle that guarantees perfectly this non-regression of laws, but it has been recently confirmed by the Supreme Court in other cases, especially Bolsonaro's term regulations that reduced very strongly environmental protection. So as a conclusion, it's obviously there are significant impacts of artificial intelligence, and that's a concern. And Costanza's expositions has explained very in a very detailed manner how these concerns which these concerns are. And well, the legal framework can be used to require data centers to do the best, but that's very, very difficult to get to effectivity and to precisely define what to do the best means. And that's I think the point of our debates. There may be possibility of litigation with some institutional stress, in the sense that we have many injunctions in Brazil that afterwards are suppressed by other instance of the judiciary. So litigation can protect environmental rights, but with a lot of frictions as well. And of course, there are these environmental justice issues to which Costanza already referred, and I think that we can discuss after the presentations. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna. In benefit of time, I'm going to shift the other part, but then in the end we will have time for discussion. And actually, I think it's quite valuable, these efforts of trying to check what is the legislation and rules that already apply to a particular problem involving AI, and to find what are the gaps and what has to be fulfilled. Some countries like Australia, for instance, they did not opt for general legislation on AI, but instead start to study in each sector what is the regulation, what should be improved in order to bring legal certainty. So this is an effort that I'm sure you and Costanza should interact to find solutions. And on the other hand, for instance, the Brazilian draft has gone through a significant shift from a transversal and general regulation to a more sectorial approach. So it's interesting to hear what are the challenges that the AI Act that has chosen this general and transversal approach that are experiencing to find solutions to our regulation here in Brazil. So I will leave the whole discussion for the end of our meeting, because the subject matters are connected, as we have seen. And then I will leave the floor for Tarik to talk about the AI Act.
Thank you very much, Giuliano. Thank you for inviting me to this conference for the second time. The first time was, I think, in December. Yeah. I was in France, but thank you very much. I'm very happy to be able to discuss this important subject. I will share with you not really some obligations, the problems of how to know which obligations we have to comply with. It's not the real approach I want to have with you, because attempting to have a general and complete approach of obligations, for now it's really complex because the obligations are very detailed. The certifications problem are very complex, are under construction. So I didn't choose this way to discuss with you challenges we encounter in compliance with AI Act. I prefer share with you some experience as a member of the committee appointed by the Minister of Justice to find out which kind of tools of software and which kind of in which kind of use the AI should be implemented in courts. So it's something interesting because we can compare this compliance in courts also with companies. So it's not totally far away. With courts, compliance in courts, there are more complications because giving justice is something more complex than just being in compliance with AI Act. So as you know, the regulation in AI is ambitious and extremely complex. So that's why I prefer this second way to expose to you, to explain some aspects, some problem I encounter trying to comply with AI Act when we are thinking on the tools to use and the use case. So I determine 5 obstacles. I find out 5 obstacles. It's not exhaustive, of course, but I think it's important to highlight. First, it appears logical and simple, but it is not. It's the timeline for the AI Act's entry into force. Second, I will discuss, and I will not delay. I want to let you know that the complexity of the compliance process, because there are a lot of things, and certification is part of this complication. Third, I will explain articulation with existing regulations. I will not just saying that it's complex, but I will trying to find out how companies could manage this integration of this new compliance in an existing compliance according, for example, GDPR. And fourth, the still unstable European balance in digital matter. It's not just in digital matter, but Europeans' political, it's complicated at this time. We can notice some shift, as you mentioned in the introduction. And fifth, but very quickly, because it's also under construction, the role of authorities in the deployment of the AI Act. So first, the timeline for the AI Act entry into force. As you probably know, the AI Act entered in force in August 2024, but everything will totally enter in force and in 2026. So we have this transitional period which led the companies in a confusion and uncertainty, because many details must be specified by implementing, and certification are not totally implemented details. We every time are expected from the Commission guidelines to know how companies should comply with AI Act. For example, the Code of Conduct for Generative AI will be in preparation and will probably be published, I think it's in May 2025. So today, for some companies making investment decision, it's complicated because they are navigating partially blind, not knowing how the rules will be in few months. I will come back to this point later. The second obstacle I wish to present is the complexity and ambiguity of the compliance process. For some companies, it's a new and complex domain. Compliance for USA, or I don't know how it is for Brazil, but compliance, the manner to comply with a text, is something natural. But for French, maybe you will discuss about that. For German, it's not the traditional way to apply a rule. So for a lot of companies, probably not bigger, but the small and medium companies, for a lot of companies, the compliance method is something new they have to adapt with. So how to do that? There are two kinds of problem, of challenge to try to overcome. Internally, companies should make a compliance map with cartography of potential risks. It sounds easy, but clearly, in fact, it's probably the most complicated thing to do, because they have to prevent how could be the risk in the future and integrate that in a cartography. A certification will be on that in part, and there are a lot of things to trying to preempt and to prevent in this cartography. It's not specific to AI Act, the compliance to AI. It's a business compliance in general, but it will also work on AI Act compliance. Making an audit of the user's case and the tools is the first step every company and administration is doing now, and we are trying to share experiences between administration. Companies share less, of course, because of competitiveness, but that is where we are now in the cartography and the compliance with AI Act. Externally, if I can say, I will not speak a lot about that, because you said that you are working on, and it's a specific subject which probably need a special conference for 1 or 2 days to be able to embrace all the problem. It's the certification procedure, because it raised a lot of questions. The intervention of notified bodies to certify certain high-risk system is not totally clear, and we are waiting every month for guidelines from Commission to know exactly which criteria companies should comply with, and which authorities will be able to give certification or not, and how to follow certification and not just giving certification first time and letting company, and which kind of sanction. We are following that daily, and it's not something we can, I think, discuss quickly here. There is maybe something I want to mention. It's the voluntary certification, which is in the AI Act for non-high risk system, like AI label for who want to reach it, to have it. It remains ambiguous a lot, because if there are some legal basis we know about this kind of certification, its deployment still requires clarification. But in fact, for all kind of certification, we have this uncertainty. Third, the articulation with existing regulation, it's something complex. We know that the articulation between AI Act and GDPR, or AI Act with DSA, is something complicated to manage. But in fact, for companies, it means change the process they already have and they already built for the GDPR compliance. And this means that a lot of things will change, and companies are lost a little bit they lose their compass in compliance because of this modification AI Act give. Why modification? Because we have a lot of topics overlap with requirements of GDPR and AI Acts. For this kind of topics which overlaps, companies have to correct their current process to be able to not having contradiction in their compliance. So companies, as I said, are rearranging their process internally, and they need a lot of law advice and help to comply with, and they are thinking if they have to reach to looking for these competences externally by law firm, or if they have to arrange internally their legal firm. So this legal uncertainty complicates the task of corporate layers, of course, but for companies first of all, and guidance will need to be provided by authority to clarify all this kind of thing. The fourth point of my presentation is not directly with the theme I am discussing with you, but it's probably the most complicated thing companies encounter now. It's the unstable European political balance, because if the AI Act, and I think you mentioned that in introduction, Giuliano, if the AI Act was negotiated and adopted in a spirit of regulatory firmness, there has been a change in favor and simplification and greater flexibility. We have a lot of signals about that. Competitiveness compass has changed. The Green Deal was the competitiveness compass, and I will not discuss this topic. I'm not an expert, and we have two experts which spoke about that. But the competitiveness compass, step by step, appear to replace the Green Deal compass. It's not, I exaggerate probably, but we can notice this difficult balance in European Union. Concretely, I have some numbers to share. The European Union has set a target to reduce reporting burdens, reporting including business, corruption and things like that, but also environmental reporting, by 25% for big companies and 35% for small and medium enterprises. These objectives initially concerned green and financial regulation, but the European Union says that they want to introduce this kind of flexibility also in AI Act. How it could appear by a translation into more flexible implementation guidelines. That's why I was talking that the progression in entering in force, it's a very complex thing to manage, because the political of European Union is changing not daily but really quickly, and this kind of modification of the compass are something we can notice. We can mention also, but it's more another topic, the omnibus project, which was presented today, which is presented today to Europe for simplify the compliance. It's not directly about AI, but it concerns environment and climate, and it concerns businesses, so it concerns all companies which will have something to do with AI. So for companies, this uncertainty led them in some confusion, and it's complicated to trying to start to invest a lot in something when you don't know how the regulation will be in a few months, not in 2 years or 3 years, but in a few months. We are seeing that the regulation is not stable and the compass is not totally fixed. So it's a huge challenge, and companies doesn't have the same behavior. Some of them prefer wait to see how the regulation will be. Other think that comply with a strong and the hard compliance is a good level, and it's something for their reputation they have to do, even if more later the regulation will be more flexible and light. So finally, very quickly, the last point I want to mention with you is the role of the competent authorities. It's impossible now to explain who will do what, but there are a lot of authorities in the European level, in the national level, which have to create some processes to cooperate and to have an harmonization in guidelines. And the certification or the question companies should have to ask depend a lot on how this ecosystem of authorities will be built, because companies have to know to who they can ask a question when they have to comply with AI Act, when they have to build some certification process or things like that. So the role of authorities is something under construction now, and it is something that we have to follow very closely. So to conclude, navigating the new European AI framework requires a combination, as you can notice, of regulatory expertise, technical rigor, and strategic vision. So that's probably why it's complex, and some companies and administration also could feel a little bit lost in this regulation. In Europe, certainly the balance between ethics and competitiveness is not easy to achieve. USA don't have the same problem, because it seems that they don't speak a lot or don't worry a lot about climate question, about things, ethic question in AI. For China, it's the same thing. But in Europe, the balance between ethic and competitiveness is something which complicate the navigation in the European digital regulation, and particularly in the European AI Act. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tarik. Your talk was really illuminating by pointing out the main challenges, and regarding the making some comparison, particularly with certification, which is a subject that Georg and I are completely focused on, and as you said, one of the difficulties has to do with the fact that there is mandatory certification in the AI Act. So the private entities has to wait for the sign-offs from the authorities, and there is some bureaucracy involved. In the Brazilian draft, all the rules on certification are, and all the demands of certification are voluntary, to be developed by private entities, even the codes of conduct that should be detailed sectorially. So this is an advantage in the sense that private entities can move forward and bring what are the standards, of course, with reference to international standards, but to fulfill this demand, and what is more important, to bring legal certainty on what are the standards, how it should be implemented. On the other hand, there is the legitimation issue. Yeah? If everything is developed by the private companies, how can the state be sure that public interest is being fulfilled? So there is this trade-off, and the right balance should be investigated to have a balanced regulation. But your indication already that this is a problem, that private entities are waiting for clear guidance on how to implement certification, is an interesting one. So now regarding responsibility, I would give the floor for Georg Borges, and I'm sure he has also something to say about the AI Act and certification, since it's something that we were discussing, and we came discussing in the car, in the breakfast, and etc. So, okay, Georg, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Giuliano, for having me here, and good morning to everyone online and here in the room. I'm really angry with Giuliano, as I suggested to switch my topic to the AI Act, since I'm working on the AI Act for 3 years, but he said, no, you will talk on liability. It's also an important topic. So I will talk about liability, and you will have to wait for my book on AI Act to see. Just one message, because it seems that the view on the AI Act is a rather critical one at this moment. Just keep in mind, the AI Act does not impose any reporting system duties on anyone. And it does not impose any duties on 90% of all industry. So one should relax. And actually, the function of the AI is to make it possible to comply with existing law. It's not the focus is not on imposing anything new, it's on easing compliance with existing law. That is often misunderstood, but that may be left to the discussion. And with that, I share my slides, if I'm successfully be able to do this. And I hope I can go to, maybe first of all, presentation. Go away. From the beginning, and now I share. It seems now
Yeah. Okay. Can you try again, people?
Yes. I hope that people can understand me now online. Can I hear a reaction from the people online? Can you hear me now? That would be helpful. So then, thank you. Thank you very much. So we are hosting Max Planck, and our faculty itself has a focus on Europe, which is obvious as we are located in the center of Europe at the French border, and IT and law. And this is why Saarland is an interesting place for the research in the realm of IT and law. In our institute, we work in interdisciplinary. We host a professor of informatics in our faculty, who is the co-director of the institute, and we are involved in a number of research projects together with companies, with industry, and with public administration, as well as the German government. You see the logo of just a few of this. We are also heavily involved in education in the field of IT and law with our master's degree, which is available at this moment in German language only. But the thing that is available to everyone, and I would like to invite you to our annual summer school, which will be held in the first half of August this year. And as a part of the summer school, we will have an international conference on AI governance with a focus on certification. So if you want to join the discussion on AI certification, please join our summer school this year. Information application is open now, and Professor Giuliano and myself, we will be talking in this teaching and in the summer school and talking together with you on AI certification there. Another interesting opportunity for scholars, including younger scholars such as people in the ordinance, might be the IEEE International Conference on Metaverse, which will be held in August this year in Canada. It's a hybrid conference, and for its first time, it has a track on legal and ethical issues of the metaverse. And that is a big chance, big opportunity, since if you open a new track which is unknown before, probably there's a very good chance to have an accepted paper. So if you're interested in the realm of metaverse, just have a look at this conference. With that, I jump into my topic with a short introduction, and then some gaps in the existing legislation, and then the kind of solution, the new product liability directive. The introduction, well, risks associated with AI systems are well known. The example of the self-driving car killing pedestrians has been given the rise to a discussion on the risks of AI. And what is interesting that in the case of the self-automated car, it is often the driver and owner of the car who may be victim of it. Just keep in mind, because that is an important aspect of product liability here. And I know that Professor Giuliano has been using the example of the self-driving car in his lectures for a couple of years already, and he has been very active. It's very good to keep in mind. Of course, you don't need to be implemented into a car to be harmful. The example of the chatbot Tay a couple of years ago revealed at a very early stage that even chatbots can violate norms and commit crimes to some extent, because Tay was, after a few hours, making a statement that were prohibited illegal. And of course, we are concerned regarding discrimination by AI systems, and that is one big topic that is in the focus of the AI Act, of course, with all the rules on data governance and so on, having in mind the potential of discrimination, and you know the buzzword of machine bias or bias in the data. Regarding liability, it is interesting to notice that the industry is asking for regulation. 90% of the German industries asked for clear regulation on liability for AI, and 85% in the same poll wished that there be independent authorities to govern AI. So there is demand for regulation on liability that is coming from those who should be governed, like Elon Musk himself stated, is regulators. Don't forget it. A few years ago, even Elon Musk was asking for regulation. What are the aspects of a regulation in the field of liability for AI? First of all, to guarantee compensation for victims. But if we go into the technical aspects, there are a lot of different strategies that should be considered. You might consider compensation funds, as the EU Parliament did some 10 years ago, rather than going to liability. But the discussion has demonstrated clearly that the well-known and established regime of liability is probably the better place to guarantee compensation. And here, as you will know, we distinguish very different forms of liability. I would like to draw your attention to this discussion, since what we all have in the different jurisdictions is fault-based liability. That's well known in Brazilian law as it is in German law or elsewhere. And then we have different forms of strict liability. And I would like to distinguish in the discussion strict liability in a broader sense, which is also covering product liability, and objective liability, which is a more stricter form of strict liability. Today, I will, of course, focus on product liability. And if we going to consider regulation, we also have to consider to whom to address. The addressee of liability is a very important aspect, because there is the producer and seller on the one side, and there is the operator or user of a product on the other hand. Both can be eligible as addressees of liability, and it's a good question that you may consider whom to choose to be liable. there are gaps in the liability regime for AI systems. In the case of traditional law, delicate law, which is based on fault, which requires a human action, we have the point that the new AI systems or machines equipped with AI systems can show more something which I call behavior, as they can flexibly react on a given situation, which the good old steam engine, dangerous enough, could not. But nowadays, the automated car may decide even on whom to kill in the case of an accident. You know that problem. So if tort law requires fault, which is the breach of a duty of care, and requires human behavior, and we replace human behavior by machine behavior, and that's what we are doing when it comes to AI, then there is a gap, because there is no human acting anymore. And that gap becomes bigger and bigger with the technical development, because the more the machine can act independently, the less there's place for human fault. Obviously, there is an increasing gap in traditional tort law, obviously. Now we have product liability in Europe as well as in the US. It's called liability, but you have the similar rules in your Consumer Protection Act. It's funny to see that you frame it in Brazil differently from as we do, but in its essence, the rules are very similar. So if I report now on product liability, please don't think I'm talking about Europe. I'm talking about general principles of product liability that are well known in a huge number of jurisdictions, including Brazil. In Europe, as we call it Europe, product liability, it is based on the European Product Liability Directive of 1985. So a rather established piece of legislation which has come into its years. And we have discussed for decades if a product comprises cyber physical systems and software. I don't know how you deal with it in the Brazilian Consumer Protection Act, but in Europe, we were asking and debating if pure software is covered under the notion of a product. Actually, in literature, the unanimous opinion is clear yes, but there's no case law on this, so there's still some uncertainty. And then the question is, product liability is liability for a defect of the product. A defect is a property of a product, but an action is not a property. You see, if an automated car makes a mistake in driving, the mistake is an action. It's not a property of a car, but there must be a property of the car to be a defect. How can we bridge this? There is a discussion for this. And then if we consider the abilities of an AI system and want to judge if it's defectious or not, what is the reference point? All what we have is the reference point is human behavior, human abilities. Should we then limit the notion of defect or the concept of defect to what a human can do? Again, the example of a car, should we expect a AI-driven car to be have the same level of compliance as a human driver? No, we want to have it to be better. As an interim result, and you see I'm rushing through my slides just for the sake of having time for the discussion, it is obvious that there are gaps in the liability regime in the case of damage caused by AI systems. There are gaps in traditional fault-based liability as well as in the existing product liability. So as an interim result, compensation is not guaranteed. And for the legislator and experts that are advising the legislator, there are different strategies conceivable. You could accept the gap. You could try to make the machine liable by a concept of e-person. You could resort to attribution or use strict liability. All of this is considered, has been considered in recent years in Europe, and is still, there's still an ongoing debate. But I will pick today, of course, only product liability, because we are having a new product liability directive, which is brand new. October entered into force just in December, 2 months ago, and it will repeal the existing product liability directive in December 2026. So there's a 2 years transition period to prepare for the new rules. Now, what are the new rules? Just by seeing the chapter and the article's header, you will, those of you who are familiar with product liability will easily see that the new product liability directive does not introduce a completely new scheme, but is very similar to the known systems, and to my knowledge, still is similar to the Brazilian regulation on product liability in the Consumer Protection Act. So the basis will still be a defectiveness. Article 7 is referring to this, a defectiveness in the product which causes a damage to a natural person. Let's go. This is the idea. Article 5 grants a right to compensation to any natural person who suffers damage caused by defective product. This is the principle that you would also find in Brazilian law. And then the question arises, when is a product defective? And it is defective according to Article 7 when it does not provide the safety that can be expected. Interesting enough, what is a product? I was referring to this question. A product is now any movable or an immovable, including of software. Why is that interesting? Because software includes AI systems in the definition of the AI Act, because if it comes to be implemented to be functionable, any AI system is software. So PLD is the liability for software, and AI systems. What about an AI model, if you are aware of that distinction? A model is not functional unit, it's not running, so it's not software as we understand it. However, it is a component of software that we can say that, at least I'm making this thesis in my article on the new PLD. In that case, the PLD would even reach out to the developers of an AI model, keep in mind. And then, because the producer of a component is jointly and severally liable for any damage. So if you are someone who is in that industry, train your model, yeah, you'll be liable for this if you do it during the course of a business, not if you do it open software and you own also not in the case of universities. Research is out of the scope of application of the PLD. And receipts of liability, I was already anticipating it. It is manufacturers of components such as AI models, importers, and brand new and super interesting from a researcher's perspective, anyone who modifies a product. So guys, if you go to your cars or motorbikes and modify them, you become producer. Don't do it. That's a clear cut. Don't work around your motorbikes or your AI systems, because you will be considered producer and be liable under the new PLD. This is a clear thing I have to tell to some people who like to modify and some products. What is now really interesting is, as we know, software and AI systems as software, there are updates. They are always improved within a short period of time. And here, the new PLD has a new regime, which is really novel and far-reaching, in my view, very innovative and justified. And it just says, any update is a product itself, and it can trigger the product liability for the existing product. So if after an update your computer doesn't work anymore, it's defective under the new PLD. That was there was a lot of uncertainty regarding this point, but that is clear cut now. And the best thing, even a non-existing update can trigger liability. What does it mean? If, as you know, due to IT security incidents, the hacking attacks and so on, updates to maintain IT security are necessary on a constant basis. And if the producer fails to provide updates regarding IT security, the product becomes defective. So if there, and this is very important, because by this, if you see the whole picture, it means that we have a life cycle responsibility for software in the new PLD, which is a novelty. I don't know any law on this world which has it established in that clarity. That is an innovative step, and as you will obviously see, if you cannot use your engine, your plane, your car, because it doesn't work correctly due to missing updates, it's obvious we need it. And of course, if you have an AI system that is still ongoing learning, you have also this life cycle responsibility. So ongoing training will trigger product liability each time it creates a new form of behavior or a new feature. The biggest problem in practice, I think practitioners in the room will probably agree, is the burden of proof, because the claimant, which is the person affected, has to prove that the product was defective and did cause the damage. Here, there are new two instruments in the PLD, and one is Article 9, which provides for disclosure of evidence, which we didn't have in Europe to this extent. Any party can ask the court to issue an order to reveal evidence. That will be a very useful tool in court proceedings. But the more interesting is even the shift of the burden of proof. If you know, work in practice, or if you are interested in civil procedure, you know that the burden of proof is very often a decisive factor in a case. Whoever who has the burden of proof has the bigger problem. But now, according to Article 10, there is a shift of the burden of proof in 3 cases. And the one that is most relevant to AI is Article 10, paragraph 2, litera C. I will read it with you. The defectiveness of the product shall be presumed where, now we're losing the online participants, that's not good. Hopefully they can come back. Where the claimant demonstrates that the damage was caused by an obvious malfunction of the product during reasonable foreseeable use. What does it mean? It goes back to our car problem. We have a car that was driving perfectly for 100,000 miles, but at one day it causes an accident, kills the pedestrian or the driver or whatever, or hopefully not, but causes an accident. How can you prove that the car was defective? Impossible for you. Impossible. You don't have access to the software you don't know what is to be required to be not defective for an autonomously driving car. It's just nothing you can easily establish. But now we go back to Article 10, para 2 and litera C. And we can say there was an obvious malfunction, because an autonomously driving car should not drive over a pedestrian. That is exactly what the Commission had in mind, what the European legislator had in mind when establishing that presumption in Article 10. And now it is on the producers to demonstrate, no, the car was not defective, even though it was killing the pedestrian or the driver for some reason. So that is really the true game changer in my view, and I'm very curious how that will work in practice from December 2026 on. So you have it on the slide. I consider it the big game changer, and that's all from my side. Obviously, the new PLD offers important amendments to product liability by opening the scope of application to software. It includes AI systems and even AI models, and that is clear. There we have the responsibility of the whole production chain, because all the producers of each component are joined and severally liable. In addition, we have the responsibility for the entire life cycle of a product when it comes to updates. It is an open question if the product liability will be the central basis for liability in the future. At least it will be a very important one. There are still some gaps, some important gaps, as it does only protect natural persons. Good for us, who we are sitting here, but most of the damage is suffered by companies, and they're not protected by the new PLD, unfortunately. That's it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Georg. I'm sure I don't regret asking you to talk about responsibility. I'm sure that you will bring several interesting matters commenting the AI Act. But actually, I believe we are in the beginning of the year with our activities in the Lawgorithm and also in the Forum for Responsible AI. And the concern that I have is that the debate here in Brazil for regulation or interpretation of law stays in a very superficial level, as it tends to be. So now there is this discussion that Europeans are, as I said in the beginning, questioning whether the regulation is not excessive, what are the challenges, how can we interpret the existing regulation. And for instance, I have read, I believe it yesterday in the newspaper here, I don't remember which one, that Europeans have suspended the regulation on responsibility about AI. And that's simply not true. Actually, as you have shown, there is a product liability regulation that applies to software, so that it applies to AI. Yeah.
May I add a word on it? I don't know. Actually, there was the Commission published a package, the suggestion for two directives, one being the product liability directive and one being a specific directive on liability for AI systems. But from the beginning, the proposal for AI liability directive was under fire, and many researchers such as me and others found it poorly drafted and not convincing. Actually, it didn't add almost anything to the existing law. We found it too passive and not enough. And the European Parliament reacted sharply and asked for a big amendment of this AI liability directive. However, there is no consensus on how to regulate. So the different strategies that I was mentioning are still in discussion, are still at stake, and the European Commission decided not to take it up at this moment in time, but to leave it to more deeper research in the strategy of liability regulation. Now, it's not given up, but we left this poorly drafted proposal, and actually I know the people who drafted it, their work was not poor, but for political reasons they were not allowed to come forward with a stronger approach. It's also interesting that the Commission already 2 years ago was afraid of over-regulating and wanted to have more insights, which means the ball is here in our hands. We have to offer better research on liability regulation when it comes to to AI. So just to give a bit more precise interpretation what it means, suspended.
Yeah, exactly. The problem is to give the impression that Europeans are revoking regulation or suspending regulations. One thing to say that Europeans are going to move more carefully in the possible revision of product liability regulation, but this doesn't mean that there is a regulation on product liability, and it applies to AI. Another superficial view in this field that we also see in discussions here in Brazil is that, well, the Europeans have a gap on their liability rules, and the Brazilians do not. We have a strict liability, and we have consumer law protection. But actually, there are similar difficulties that you may find. For instance, the discussion, yeah, it's a different regime, I know. There are differences, but it doesn't mean that everything here in the rules in the Brazilian regime solve the challenges brought about by AI. For instance, you've brought this complicated issue of what does it mean that a product is defective? Yeah.
Just let me tell you one thing. It's not completely correct picture to say we don't have a gap. Europeans have one. Since in the case of self-driving cars, of course, we also have strict liability strict liability, but it is the owner of the car, the keeper of the car, who is strictly liable. And the question is not, of course, compensation for the pedestrian is guaranteed, but in some cases the car is killed. Most of the Tesla accidents, as you remember, were in these cases the driver was injured or even killed, and then he's himself liable for his own death. Congratulations. And you don't have another solution for that problem, as I know. Mm-hmm. So there is these gaps also in Brazilian law, and the question is really the owner of a car who's driving himself and potentially killed by his own car the right person to be liable for his own death? I don't think so.
Yeah, of course, and so that's exactly our concern. There are these messages. Europeans have a gap. Brazilians do not have a gap in their legislation. Europeans are retreating. They acknowledge that they are wrong. It's not the liability regulation on AI was suspended. Actually, we have to take a closer look on what is happening. Otherwise, these messages may influence poor regulation. So there are challenges and difficulties regarding the application of consumer law to liability deriving from AI systems. For instance, the discussion of how can you find what is the defective component in a defective product. Regarding AI, as Georg has shown, it's a behavior, and sometimes it's not even a behavior which is limited to the informatics system, but it's the behavior that has to be considered as a socio-technical systems that involve the organization operating the AI system. So there are several issues that must be explored and studied, and this first meeting of the Forum on Responsible AI is an invitation to take a closer look. Let us not be impressed by these news, but let us really study the AI Act. What are the challenges? What's going on with product liability? What are the threats brought about by AI on sustainability? How can we deal with it with Brazilian regulation already existing and in force? What should be supplemented? What are Europeans dealing with it? And also we have to look to US regulation also, because it's also superficial to say US policy is is completely lenient on regulating AI. It's just actually there is a network of lots of different regulation at different levels in regulatory agencies, in state law, also in municipalities. So we have to take care about these sayings. US chose not to regulate AI in any sense. Europeans are retreating because they have regulated too much. They understood that they are wrong. There is a lot to be checked, and we have to take a much closer look to understand and to find our way in this regulation according to Brazilian interests and according to Brazilian problems. So this is the invitation that I make, and I make the invitation now, asking the audience if you have comments or questions to be debated here in some minutes of debate before we close this section. Both to the audience in person and to the online audience, please. Okay. Yeah, I have it here. Okay.
There's one raising the hand. Carlos.
Carlos Cablan.
Yeah.
Yeah. Please, Carlos, you may pose your question. You are muted. Bernardo. No. Oi? O computador? Ah. Ele não tem como falar lá, né? Ah, tá. Não, tá, o som tá aberto. Aqui. Tá com o som aqui. Deixa eu ver. Não. Não consegue ouvir. Não. He's talking, but we are not hearing. Sorry. As a Brazilian educator and researcher specializing in artificial intelligence, to what extent has the non-regression principle been examined in recent judicial decisions, and are there significant cases in which its application has been contested, reaffirmed, or reinterpreted by courts? This is one of his questions. I believe you mean non-regression principle in environmental law, so not I don't know it about in regulation of education. I'm not aware of it, so I'll leave the room for. Actually, I will give the floor to Anna to talk about the regression principle.
Thanks for the question. As Professor Juliano mentioned, the non-regression principle is a principle of the environmental law. And I will briefly address more precisely your question, but just to, as a general comment, I don't think it's applied to artificial intelligence regulation, but I brought it in the sense that if the social demands for artificial intelligence advancement bring as a consequence deeper impacts in environment and a pressure to reduce environmental protection, especially to license data centers, for example. And then the non-regression principle could be applicable. That was the sense in which I mentioned the principle. So now I will go to your question that when it was applied by courts, and I was very quick when I mentioned it was applied in a decision about the constitutionality of federal statute focus on the protection of the native vegetation. But this new statute was less protective than the statute it was substituting for. So that triggered the discussion about the non-regression principles, and the Brazilian Supreme Court considered that, well, the principle is applicable, but, well, let's see, the legislative branch has the competence to rule the subject, and if it brings kind of compensation for which situation where a reduction of protection might have happened, that's fine, that's not in violation of the principle. So that was the first test this principle had. But more recently, during the Bolsonaro term, the Bolsonaro's government reduced very clearly very often, and many federal protection of the environment by changing regulations, the different regulations, or paralyzing programs, and this kind of conduct. So in this paralyzation of programs and change of regulation were brought to the Supreme Court under, I think, constitutional litigation, ADPFs in Portuguese, for example, and the principle was used as a basis for decision that it was unconstitutional for the government to reduce the protection through these acts. So I hope I explained it.
Thank you, Anna. There are two other questions by Carlos that I can wrap it. Is what role should cross-functional AI committees play in developing and enforcing compliance standards within educational institutions? Then, should companies in the meantime adopt a precautionary approach to ensure compliance and mitigate potential risks? I think that we could approach this question not only limited to the education sector, but first by saying that actually comparing the European with the Brazilian, the approach in the Brazilian draft. As I said, there was a shift in the Brazilian draft for a sectorial approach. So considering the problems that and the challenge that Tarik brought about how to make it compatible with existing regulation, how can compliance through certification be developed? Well, the solution, which is still under debate in the Brazilian parliament, the solution found by the draft was to invite the private sector to regulate, self-regulate through codes of conduct and enforce through certification programs that would be accredited and validated by sectorial regulatory agencies. So this is a sectorial approach, and of course committees and associations in a particular sector of activities would have a major role in bringing about how to fulfill, how to detail and specify what are the governance and the best practices to comply with those general standards which are in the draft bill and also in the AI Act. The doubts appear in the AI Act because also there the standards for governance are general and need specification in different sectors. So the solution, how it is in the Brazilian draft, which is not final, of course, is to invite the private sector and provide a role by sectorial agencies to validate these, actually this self-regulation and self-enforcement. And I believe that actually the private agencies can do it already. The sectorial associations already can take this step and start to draft best practices. Actually, the Forum for Responsible AI was primarily conceived to gather these companies from different sectors to discuss standards and best practice to contribute to this effort of specifying standards for the development and operation application of AI systems responsibly.
Yes, I agree with what are you saying. Just to insist on the specificity for France, maybe not for all Europe, but for France to adopt a compliance method. We don't have a lot of sector of regulation where the compliance method, which let companies and the private person implicate themselves in the regulation, is something come from US, and we don't really comfortable with that. So that's why the people who has to comply with are a little bit lost, because they have to rule themselves and they are not prepared for that. So that's why the guidelines we are waiting for are very important to give guidelines, and that's why what the authorities will say is very important. We have some specialists of the compliance method, but we are discussing in the compliance, whereas in compliance, what is really compliance and what is just a rule you have to follow. And when it's a real compliance, the implication of the person, the stakeholders is stronger than normal rules. And maybe to finish, the audit of the cases you have to manage is probably the most complex thing to do, because we are afraid with AI, but if you look very well in what you have to comply with AI Act, you realize that there are just a few useful use cases you you really interested with compliance?
Just to complement to Carlos, let us suppose that the Brazilian AI draft were entering into force today. So then it's not only regulatory agencies. We have imported some, I think in the 90s, the model of regulatory agencies of US. So we have sectorial regulatory agencies, but what the draft says is that not only the regulatory agencies, but also public organs from the government that are responsible for particular sectors would have competence for enforcement and also for accrediting certification institutions for responsible AI. So entities in the educational sector could already develop codes of conduct, and also if it was enforced, these codes of conduct and certification program could be validated, for instance, by the Ministry of Education, and that this will bring the rules and the best practices in a clear view, and it will bring, I believe, legal certainty on the implementation. What has to be implemented in terms of governance in the educational sector? That will be that's what would happen. But actually, what I used, I'm saying, and I firmly believes that differently from the AI Act, where there is mandatory certification, and they have to expect to what are the standards in these guidelines. If there is no obligation, it's just an acknowledgement and authorization for self-regulation and self-enforcement through certification, actually the private sector could already give this step forward and start regulating it, even independently from the approval of the Brazilian draft. Georg.
Nothing to add.
Do we have any other question? Okay, so we can conclude our activities today. It was really a pleasure, and it was really enlightening to hear all the contributions that were presented here by Costanza in the first place, and then by Ana Nusdeu, Tarik Lakssimi, and Professor Georg Borges. And we are going to promote further opportunities to deepen this debate, which I believe is quite important to think and to reflect about what are the paths that must be taken in the drafting of Brazilian regulation, and also what are the policies that should be taken forward, not only by the public sector, but also by the private sector. So thank you very much. And this concludes our meeting today. Thank you very much for coming, both online and in person.